The storm that rolled through Sweetwater, Texas in the summer of 1878 brought more than just rain. It brought Jacob Thornton to his knees in a way no bullet or bronco ever had. And when his wife Rachel died giving birth to their daughter on that lightning-split night, he discovered that grief could keep a man's eyes open wider than any amount of coffee ever could. The baby girl came into the world screaming, her tiny fists clenched tight as if ready to fight the very air itself. And Jacob held her in his calloused hands, watching her red face scrunch up with each wail, feeling like his heart had been ripped clean out of his chest and replaced with something raw and terrifying. He named her Sarah, after Rachel's mother, and from that first moment, sleep became a stranger to him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rachel's face going pale, heard her last labored breath, felt the way her hand had gone limp in his. So he stayed awake, rocking Sarah through the endless nights in the small ranch house 10 miles outside of town, his body growing more exhausted with each passing day while his mind refused the mercy of rest. The ranch hands tried to help. Old Miguel, who had worked cattle with Jacob for 5 years, brought his wife Rosa to the house, hoping she might settle the baby, but Sarah would scream until her face turned purple, rejecting every attempt at comfort except for her father's arms. Doc Peterson came out from town, examined the baby and declared her perfectly healthy, just strong-willed. "Some babies are like that," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "She knows what she wants, and what she wants is you." Jacob was 26 years old, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell across his forehead when he forgot to push it back. Before Rachel died, he had been quick to smile, known throughout the county for his fair dealing and his way with horses. Now his face had taken on a gaunt, haunted quality, his blue eyes rimmed with red from the sleepless nights. He went through the motions of running the ranch, but his hands shook when he tried to rope cattle, and twice he nearly fell from his horse, catching himself at the last moment when his exhausted body started to shut down without his permission. 3 weeks after Sarah was born, Miguel found him collapsed in the barn, the baby somehow still cradled safely against his chest, even in unconsciousness. They carried him inside, but the moment anyone tried to take Sarah from his arms, both father and daughter woke with a start, and the screaming began again. Jacob's eyes would snap open, wild and unfocused, and he would clutch Sarah tighter, some primal instinct overriding his desperate need for sleep. "You cannot go on like this," Miguel said, standing in the doorway of the ranch house as the sun set on another blistering day. "You will die, Jacob." And then what happens to the little one? Jacob sat in the rocking chair Rachel had insisted they buy from the catalog, the one that had arrived just 2 days before she went into labor. He moved it back and forth in a steady rhythm, Sarah fussing against his shoulder, not quite crying but not settled either. "I cannot sleep," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Every time I close my eyes, I see her dying, and Sarah needs me. You have seen what happens when anyone else tries to hold her." "Then we must find someone," Rosa said from the kitchen, where she was preparing a pot of stew Jacob probably would not eat. He had lost weight, his shirts hanging loose on his frame. "Someone new, perhaps. Someone the baby does not know to reject." Jacob did not respond, just kept rocking, his eyes fixed on some point in the distance that no one else could see. The shadows under his eyes had taken on a bruised quality, and his hands trembled constantly now, a fine shake that never quite went away. He looked like a man being slowly ground down to nothing, worn away by grief and exhaustion in equal measure. The advertisement went into the Sweetwater Chronicle the next day, placed by Miguel without Jacob's knowledge. "Nursemaid wanted for infant girl. Room and board provided. Must be patient and gentle. Apply at Thornton Ranch. For a week, no one came. The ranch was too far out of town for most women to consider, and those who might have been interested had heard the stories about the baby who never stopped crying, about the grieving widower who looked half dead himself. On the 8th day, as Jacob sat on the porch in the afternoon heat, trying to keep Sarah calm while his vision blurred with fatigue, a figure appeared on the horizon. She came on foot, walking the long road from town with a worn carpetbag in one hand and a dusty blue bonnet shading her face from the merciless sun. Jacob watched her approach through eyes that felt like they had been scraped with sand, unable to muster the energy to stand and greet her properly. Sarah whimpered in his arms, that pre-crying sound that meant another screaming fit was about to begin, and he started the rocking motion again, back and forth, the only thing that seemed to help even a little. The woman reached the porch steps and stopped, tilting her head up so he could see her face. She was young, probably close to his own age, with auburn hair that curled slightly at her temples where it had escaped her bonnet, and green eyes that held a directness he was not expecting. Her dress was simple and travel-worn, the kind of practical calico that working women favored, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with the uncertainty of her situation. "I am here about the position," she said, her voice clear and steady. "The advertisement in the paper." Jacob tried to form words, but his tongue felt thick in his mouth, and for a moment he just stared at her, his exhausted brain struggling to process this development. Sarah began to cry in earnest, her little body going rigid against his chest, and he automatically started patting her back, the motion so ingrained after 3 weeks that it happened without thought. The woman set down her carpetbag and climbed the porch steps without waiting for an invitation. She moved slowly, non-threateningly, like someone approaching a spooked horse, and stopped a few feet away from Jacob's chair. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the baby. "She will not go to anyone else," Jacob managed to say, his voice coming out in a croak. "She only wants me." "And I cannot," he broke off, shaking his head. "I have not slept since she was born. I cannot sleep. Every time I try, I see my wife dying and Sarah cries like the world is ending, and he was not making sense anymore, the words tumbling out disconnected and desperate." The woman did not try to take the baby. Instead, she pulled up a wooden chair that had been sitting against the house and positioned it near Jacob's rocker. She sat down with her hands folded in her lap and simply looked at Sarah, who was still crying, her face red and furious. "What is her name?" the woman asked, having to raise her voice slightly to be heard over the infant's wails. "Sarah," Jacob said. "Sarah Rose Thornton. That is a beautiful name." The woman leaned forward slightly, her eyes on the baby rather than on Jacob. "Hello, Sarah Rose. You have quite a set of lungs on you, do you not? I bet you can be heard all the way back in town when you really get going." Despite everything, despite the exhaustion and the grief and the desperation, Jacob felt the corner of his mouth twitch. It was not quite a smile, but it was the closest he had come in weeks. Sarah continued to cry, but the woman did not seem bothered by it. She just sat there, speaking in that calm, steady voice. "My name is Catherine Walsh," she said. "Most people call me Catherine, though my younger brother used to call me Cat, which I never much cared for but tolerated because he was 7 years younger and thought he was terribly clever." She kept her eyes on Sarah as she spoke. "I came to Texas 6 months ago from Missouri. I was engaged to be married, but my intended decided 3 weeks before the wedding that he preferred my cousin Margaret, who has blonde hair and a considerably larger dowry than I possess. So I took what money I had saved and bought a train ticket as far west as it would take me, which turned out to be Sweetwater, and I have been working at the boarding house ever since, which is where I saw your advertisement." Jacob listened to her talk, the words washing over him like cool water. There was something soothing about her voice, something that did not demand anything from him. Sarah's cries were starting to lose some of their intensity, cycling down into angry sobs rather than full-throated screams. "I have 3 younger siblings," Catherine continued, still not looking at Jacob, all her attention focused on the baby. "I helped raise them after my mother got sick. The youngest was just a baby when mother took to her bed, so I learned to change nappies and warm milk and walk the floors at night. I am not saying I know everything about babies because every child is different, but I am not frightened of crying, and I am not frightened of hard work." She paused, and for the first time she glanced at Jacob. "And I am not frightened of grief, Mr. Thornton. I have sat with it long enough to know it cannot be rushed or reasoned with. It just has to be lived through." Something in Jacob's chest loosened, just a fraction. He had not realized how tightly he had been holding himself together until that moment, when Catherine's matter-of-fact acceptance of his pain made it feel slightly less overwhelming. Sarah had stopped screaming entirely now, reduced to hiccuping little sobs, and Jacob adjusted his hold on her, bringing her up to his shoulder to rub her back. "I cannot pay much," he said, forcing himself to address the practical matters even though his brain felt like it was moving through molasses. "The ranch does well enough, but with Rachel's doctor bills and the funeral," he stopped, swallowing hard. "Room and board and whatever I can manage beyond that." "That will be fine," Catherine said. She stood up, smoothing her skirts. "Why do you not show me where the baby sleeps and where I might put my things? Then perhaps you can introduce me to your ranch hands, and we can establish a routine that might allow you to rest." "I cannot sleep," Jacob said again, but there was less conviction in his voice this time. His body was betraying him, sagging in the chair, his eyes wanting desperately to close. "When I try, I know," Catherine said gently. "But perhaps we might start small. Perhaps you might simply sit with your eyes closed while I hold Sarah. If she cries, you will be right there. You will not be abandoning her, you will simply be resting for a moment." She held out her arms and Jacob looked at her, then down at his daughter, who had gone quiet against his shoulder, her little body finally relaxing after exhausting herself with crying. "You have not even taken her yet, and she has settled," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "How did you do that?" Catherine smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely lovely. "I think Sarah knows I am here to help," she said. "Babies are more perceptive than people give them credit for. Now, shall we go inside? This heat cannot be good for any of us." Jacob stood, his legs unsteady beneath him, and led Catherine into the house. The interior was dim and relatively cool, a relief after the blazing sun. He showed her the small room off the kitchen that had been meant for storage, but now held a crib that Rachel had sewn blankets for. The tiny bed with its handmade quilts looking both precious and heartbreaking. Catherine set her carpetbag down and ran her hand along the edge of the crib, her fingers gentle on the wood. "Your wife made these?" she asked, indicating the blankets. "Yes," Jacob said. "She was good with a needle." "She made most of the curtains in the house too," and his voice caught, and he had to stop, holding Sarah a little tighter. Catherine turned to face him fully. "She clearly loved you both very much," she said. "These blankets are beautiful. Sarah will treasure them when she is older, knowing her mother made them for her." It was the right thing to say, acknowledging Rachel without trying to minimize the loss or rush past it. Jacob found himself looking at Catherine with clearer eyes, seeing past his exhaustion to really observe her for the first time. She had a practical air about her, but there was kindness in her face, a warmth that suggested genuine care rather than mere duty. "I can take the room here," Catherine said, gesturing to a narrow door that led to what had been Rachel's sewing room. "That way I will be close if Sarah needs anything in the night. You should sleep in your own bed, Mr. Thornton. You need proper rest if you are going to be any good to your daughter." "Jacob," he said. "You should call me Jacob, and I have been trying to sleep. I just cannot seem to manage it." "Then let us try something different," Catherine said. She moved closer, her hands outstretched. "Let me take Sarah for a little while, just to hold her. You can sit right there in that chair by the window, and if she fusses, I will give her straight back. But perhaps if she is calm, you might close your eyes for a few minutes. Not sleep necessarily, just rest." Every instinct Jacob had screamed against the idea of letting someone else hold his daughter. For 3 weeks, he had been her only source of comfort, her only parent, the single constant in her small world. Giving her to someone else, even for a moment, felt like a betrayal of both Sarah and Rachel's memory. But his body was failing him. He could feel it in the way his hands shook, in the way his vision would gray out at the edges when he stood up too quickly. If he collapsed again, if he fell while holding Sarah and hurt her, he would never forgive himself. Slowly, moving like a man in a dream, Jacob transferred his daughter into Catherine's arms. Sarah made a small sound of protest, her face scrunching up, and Jacob nearly snatched her back immediately. But Catherine started swaying gently, a motion different from Jacob's rocking but equally rhythmic, and she began to hum, a low, wordless melody that seemed to fill the small room with unexpected peace. Sarah's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in preparation for crying, opened slightly. She stared up at Catherine with the unfocused gaze of a newborn, and Catherine smiled down at her, still humming that soft, meandering tune. Jacob stood frozen, waiting for the screaming to start, but it never came. Sarah shifted in Catherine's arms, making small, fussy sounds, but she did not cry. "Sit down, Jacob," Catherine said quietly, not stopping her gentle sway. "Before you fall down." Jacob made his way to the chair by the window and sank into it, his legs giving out more than he intended. From here, he could see Catherine holding Sarah, could see his daughter's small form cradled against this stranger's chest, and his heart was doing complicated things in his chest, a mix of relief and fear, and something else he could not quite name. Catherine started to sing, her voice low and sweet, the words of an old ballad that Jacob recognized from his own childhood. It was a song about rivers and journeys and finding your way home, and her voice carried the melody with an easy confidence that spoke of years of singing. Sarah's eyes began to droop, her little body going slack in that boneless way babies have when sleep finally claims them. Jacob watched, transfixed, as his daughter, the baby who had cried for 3 solid weeks, who had driven him to the brink of collapse with her relentless need, fell asleep in Catherine Walsh's arms. The sight was so unexpected, so utterly impossible based on everything he had experienced since Sarah's birth, that for a moment he thought he might be hallucinating, his overtired mind conjuring fantasies of peace. "Close your eyes, Jacob," Catherine said softly, her voice barely above a whisper as she continued to sway with Sarah. "I have her. She is safe. You can rest now." Jacob's eyes were already closing before she finished speaking, his body surrendering to the exhaustion that had been held at bay through sheer force of will. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was Catherine's face, soft in the dim light, as she looked down at Sarah and smiled, still singing that old, sweet song about finding your way home. When Jacob woke, the room was dark, and for a moment, panic seized him so completely that he could not breathe. Sarah, where was Sarah? He had fallen asleep, something he had sworn not to do, and now she is right here, came Catherine's calm voice from across the room. Still sleeping. You have been asleep for 4 hours." Jacob's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he could make out Catherine's form in the rocking chair, Sarah bundled in her arms. A lamp burned low on the table, casting just enough light to see by without being harsh. He pushed himself up from the chair where he had fallen asleep, his body protesting the movement with aches that spoke of how long he had been sitting in one position. 4 hours, he repeated, the words not quite making sense. He had not slept for 4 consecutive hours since before Rachel went into labor. He felt strange, his mind clearer than it had been in weeks, but his body heavy and disoriented, like he was inhabiting a slightly different version of himself. "You needed it," Catherine said. "Sarah has been perfect. She woke once about an hour ago, and I warmed some of the milk Rosa left. She took it well and went right back to sleep afterward." She paused, then added, "You should go to bed properly, Jacob. I will stay with her through the night. If she needs you, I will wake you, I promise. But I think we might manage on our own." "I should," Jacob started, then stopped, unsure what he should do. Every instinct told him to take Sarah, to reclaim his position as her sole caretaker, but the memory of those 4 hours of sleep was like water in a desert. He craved more of it with a desperation that was almost frightening. "Your wife would want you to take care of yourself," Catherine said gently, "so that you can take care of Sarah. You cannot do that if you are dead on your feet, Jacob. Let me help. That is why I am here." It was the invocation of Rachel that decided him. Rachel, who had been practical and sensible, who would have been appalled to see him running himself into the ground. Rachel, who would have welcomed Catherine's help and probably would have liked her immediately, recognizing a kindred spirit in this straightforward, capable woman. "All right," Jacob said, the words feeling like surrender and relief in equal measure. "But you wake me if she needs anything." "Anything at all." "I will," Catherine promised. "Now go, sleep in your own bed. Everything will be fine." Jacob made his way to the bedroom he had shared with Rachel, the room he had not been able to bring himself to sleep in since she died. The sheets still smelled faintly of her lavender soap, and for a moment the grief threatened to overwhelm him again. But exhaustion was stronger than grief just then, and he fell onto the bed fully clothed, asleep before his head settled properly on the pillow. He woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, everything felt normal, like he might roll over and find Rachel beside him, like the past 3 weeks had been nothing but a terrible nightmare. Then reality crashed back in and he sat up abruptly, every muscle in his body screaming at the sudden movement after so many hours of stillness. The house was quiet, too quiet. Jacob stumbled out of the bedroom, his heart racing, expecting to find disaster. But instead he found Catherine in the kitchen, moving efficiently between the stove and the table, Sarah asleep in a basket near the window. The baby looked peaceful, her small face relaxed in genuine sleep rather than the restless, fussy state that had been her constant condition since birth. "Good morning," Catherine said, glancing up at him with a smile. "There is coffee and I made biscuits. Rosa came by earlier and brought fresh eggs, so there will be scrambled eggs in just a moment. Sarah woke twice in the night, took her milk both times without much fuss, and has been sleeping peacefully for the past 2 hours." Jacob stood in the doorway, trying to reconcile this calm, orderly scene with the chaos that had been his life for weeks. He felt like he had stepped into someone else's house, some alternate version of reality where his wife had not died and everything was not constantly balanced on the edge of falling apart. "You should sit down before you fall down," Catherine said, echoing her words from the previous day. "You still look exhausted, Jacob. One night of sleep is not going to fix 3 weeks of none." He sat, accepting the cup of coffee she poured for him, and wrapped his hands around it, feeling the warmth seep into his palms. The coffee was good, strong and hot, and he drank it gratefully while Catherine finished preparing the eggs. She moved around the kitchen with easy familiarity, as if she had been doing this for years rather than less than a day, and Jacob found himself watching her with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "How did you do it?" he asked finally. "Sarah has not been that calm since she was born." Even Rosa could not settle her, and Rosa raised 6 children of her own. Catherine brought 2 plates to the table and sat down across from him. "I think Sarah just needed something different," she said. "She had become used to your worry, and babies pick up on that. They feel what we feel. When I hold her, I am not afraid she will start crying, so she does not feel the need to cry. And the singing helps. It helped with my younger siblings too. There is something about music that calms babies, even when nothing else will." "What was that song you were singing?" Jacob asked. "I recognized it from somewhere, but I could not place it." "It is an old Irish song my grandmother taught me," Catherine said. "She came over from County Clare when she was a girl, and she said it was a song the fishermen's wives sang while they waited for the boats to come home. A song about patience and faith and the promise of return." She took a bite of eggs, then added, "My grandmother used to say that babies remember the time before they were born, when everything was peace and darkness and the sound of their mother's heartbeat. Singing helps them remember that feeling, helps them feel safe again." Jacob thought about that as he ate, thinking about Sarah in Rachel's womb, safe and warm and unaware of the tragedy that would mark her entrance into the world. It was a bittersweet thought, but it made a certain kind of sense. "Will you teach it to me?" he asked. "The song, of course," Catherine said, and her smile was warm and genuine. "I will teach you all the songs I know if you like. Sarah should hear her father sing to her." Over the next few days, a routine established itself at the Thornton ranch. Catherine took over most of Sarah's care, feeding her and changing her and walking with her when she got fussy, always with that calm, unflappable demeanor that seemed to work magic on the baby. Jacob still held his daughter, still spent hours rocking her and marveling at her tiny fingers and the way she would grip his thumb with surprising strength. But for the first time since Rachel's death, he was able to do more than simply survive each day. He started sleeping in his own bed again, full nights of actual rest that slowly began to restore him. The tremor in his hands faded, the shadows under his eyes lightened, and the gaunt, haunted look that had taken over his face started to ease. He ate the meals Catherine prepared, good solid food that rebuilt his strength, and he found himself able to focus on the work of the ranch again, able to ride out with Miguel and the other hands without fear of collapsing. Catherine fit into the household as if she had always been there. She cleaned and cooked and cared for Sarah with a quiet competence that never felt like she was overstepping or trying to replace Rachel. She asked Jacob about his wife, gentle questions that allowed him to share memories without demanding more than he was ready to give. And she listened with genuine interest when he talked about how Rachel had loved the ranch, how she had planned to plant a garden that spring but had not lived long enough to see it grow. "We could plant it now," Catherine suggested one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, Sarah drowsing in her arms while the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red. "If you would like, as a memorial to her. I have always enjoyed gardening, and it would be nice to have fresh vegetables." Jacob considered this, turning the idea over in his mind. The thought of Rachel's garden coming to life felt both painful and right, a way of honoring her memory while also moving forward. "I think she would have liked that," he said finally. "Yes, let us plant the garden." They worked on it together over the following weeks, turning the soil in the plot Rachel had marked out before she died, planting seeds for tomatoes and beans and squash. Catherine proved to be knowledgeable about gardening, as she was about so many practical matters, and she taught Jacob things he had never known about companion planting and proper watering. Sarah would lie on a blanket nearby, watching the sky and the leaves of the cottonwood tree that shaded part of the yard, content in a way that still sometimes surprised Jacob with its simple peace. As summer deepened into its full heat, Jacob found himself watching Catherine more than he probably should. He noticed the way her hair curled at her temples when she worked in the garden, the way she would push it back with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. He noticed how she sang constantly, not just to Sarah but to herself as she worked, old songs and new ones, ballads and hymns and even bawdy tunes that made him laugh when he recognized them. He noticed how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, and how she had a habit of biting her lower lip when she was concentrating on something. He noticed all of this, and he felt guilty for noticing, because Rachel had been dead less than 2 months, and it felt like a betrayal to be aware of another woman in that way. But Catherine was there, present and alive and undeniably real, and Jacob was not dead himself, no matter how much he had wished he was in those first terrible days after Sarah's birth. One afternoon in early August, Miguel pulled Jacob aside while they were working on repairing a fence in the south pasture. The older man worked in silence for a while, hammering posts with efficient strikes, before finally speaking. "The Señorita Catherine is good for you and the baby," he said without preamble. "Rosa says she has never seen a child settle so well. It is like Sarah knew she was coming." "Catherine has a gift with her," Jacob agreed, stretching wire between 2 posts. "I do not know what I would have done without her. I was not going to last much longer." "No, you were not," Miguel said bluntly. He hammered another post, then straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Rosa also says that Señorita Catherine looks at you in a way that is not just a nursemaid looking at her employer." Jacob fumbled the wire, nearly dropping it. "Miguel, I know it has not been long since Señora Rachel died," Miguel continued, his dark eyes serious. "And I know you loved her. We all loved her. She was a good woman, a good wife. But you are still alive, Jacob, and you have a daughter to raise. That little one needs a mother, and you need a partner to help you run this ranch and build a life. There is no shame in finding that, even so soon. Rachel would not want you to be alone forever." "It has been less than 2 months," Jacob said, the guilt he had been feeling crystallizing into words. "How can I even think about anything like that when Rachel is barely cold in her grave?" Miguel's expression softened. "Because life does not stop, even when we wish it would. Because Sarah needs to be cared for and you need help, and sometimes God sends us what we need exactly when we need it, even if the timing seems wrong." He paused, then added, "Rosa wants to know if you would like to invite Señorita Catherine to dinner at our house this Sunday, along with you and the baby, of course. She thinks it would be good for all of you to get out of that house for an evening, to be around people who care for you." Jacob hesitated, then nodded slowly. The thought of sitting through a social dinner made him nervous, but he also recognized the truth in what Miguel and Rosa were trying to do. He had been isolated for too long, trapped in his grief and exhaustion. It was time to start rejoining the world, even in small ways. "All right," he said. "Sunday dinner would be good. Thank you, Miguel." That evening, Jacob extended the invitation to Catherine as she was preparing supper. Sarah propped against her shoulder as she stirred a pot of stew with her free hand. She paused in her work, looking surprised and pleased. "I would like that very much," she said. "It would be nice to get to know your friends better. Rosa has been so kind, bringing food and checking on us. I would enjoy spending more time with her." Sunday came with clear skies and a slight breeze that made the heat more bearable than it had been all week. Jacob found himself taking extra care with his appearance, changing his shirt twice, before settling on a dark blue one that Rachel had once said brought out his eyes, then feeling guilty again for caring what he looked like. Catherine appeared in the kitchen wearing a dress he had not seen before, a soft green cotton that made her eyes look even brighter, her hair pinned up neatly with a few curls left to frame her face. "You look lovely," Jacob said before he could stop himself, and then felt his face heat. "I mean that is a nice dress." Catherine smiled, not seeming offended by his awkwardness. "Thank you. It is one of the few nice things I brought with me from Missouri. I thought it might be appropriate for dinner with friends." She had Sarah bundled in a clean blanket, the baby alert and calm, looking around with curious eyes. "Shall we go? I do not want to be late." The ride to Miguel and Rosa's house took about 20 minutes, their small homestead nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. Rosa met them at the door with a wide smile, ushering them inside with enthusiastic welcomes. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh bread, and Rosa's own children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, were bustling around helping with final preparations for the meal. It was the most social Jacob had been since Rachel's funeral, and at first he felt overwhelmed by the noise and activity. But Rosa and Miguel were good hosts, keeping the conversation light and including Catherine easily in their talk. Rosa asked about Sarah's progress, exclaimed over how well she was sleeping now, and praised Catherine's skills with babies in terms that made Catherine blush and duck her head modestly. Over dinner, as dishes were passed and stories shared, Jacob found himself relaxing in a way he had not in months. Miguel told a story about a particularly stubborn bull that had caused havoc at a neighboring ranch, complete with exaggerated gestures that made everyone laugh. Rosa shared gossip from town, harmless talk about whose garden was producing the best tomatoes and which merchant had gotten a new shipment of fabric from back east. Catherine listened and contributed her own observations, fitting seamlessly into the group dynamic. After dinner, as the sun was setting, Rosa suggested they sit outside where it was cooler. The children ran off to play in the gathering dusk while the adults settled on benches outside the house. Catherine had Sarah in her arms, rocking the baby gently as she started to show signs of getting tired. "Sing for us, Señorita Catherine," Rosa said. "Jacob told Miguel that you sing beautifully. We would love to hear." Catherine looked momentarily shy, then smiled. "All right, if you would like." She adjusted Sarah in her arms and began to sing, the same Irish song she had sung that first day, her voice carrying clear and sweet in the evening air. Jacob watched her as she sang, saw the way the fading light caught in her hair, the gentle expression on her face as she looked down at Sarah, and something shifted in his chest, a loosening of the tight grip grief had held on his heart for so long. When the song ended, there was a moment of appreciative silence before Rosa clapped her hands together. "Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Sarah is so lucky to have you." She glanced meaningfully at Jacob. "You are both very lucky." On the ride home, Sarah slept peacefully in Catherine's arms, and the night was full of cricket song and the soft sounds of the horses' hooves on the packed dirt road. Jacob found himself acutely aware of Catherine beside him on the wagon seat, the warmth of her presence, the way she hummed softly to keep Sarah settled. "Thank you for inviting me today," Catherine said softly. "Miguel and Rosa are wonderful people. You are fortunate to have such good friends." "I am," Jacob agreed. "They have been a great support, especially since," he paused, finding the words harder than usual. "They have been there for me when things were very dark. I do not know if I thanked you properly for that too, for everything you have done. You saved my life, Catherine." "Maybe literally. I was not going to last much longer when you arrived." "You would have found a way," Catherine said. "You love Sarah too much to have given up, but I am glad I could help. I am glad I am here." She glanced at him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "I know I initially came just for a job, a place to stay and work to do, but it has become more than that. This feels like a home now, and you and Sarah feel like family. I hope that is all right to say." Jacob's throat felt tight. "It is more than all right," he managed. "You have become essential to us, Catherine. I cannot imagine the house without you now. I cannot imagine—" He stopped, the words he wanted to say too big, too frightening. It was too soon, far too soon to be feeling what he was feeling. Rachel had only been gone 2 months. What kind of man was he to be thinking about another woman so quickly? But Catherine was looking at him with those clear green eyes, and in them he saw understanding and patience, no pressure or expectation. "We have time," she said quietly. "There is no rush for anything, Jacob." "I am not going anywhere." Those words settled over him like a benediction, and Jacob felt something inside him relax. She was right. There was no rush. They had time to figure out what they were becoming to each other, time for his grief to ease and for whatever was growing between them to develop at its own pace. For now, it was enough to have her presence, her help, her quiet companionship. As summer turned to autumn and the brutal heat began to ease, Jacob found himself drawn more and more to Catherine's company. They would sit together in the evenings after Sarah was asleep, talking about everything and nothing. Catherine told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother's illness and her father's quiet grief afterward, about her siblings and the farm they had worked. Jacob shared memories of his own childhood, of learning to work cattle from his father, of meeting Rachel at a church social, and knowing almost immediately that she was the one he wanted to marry. Talking about Rachel became easier with Catherine. She never seemed jealous or uncomfortable when he brought up his late wife, never tried to change the subject or minimize what he had lost. Instead, she would ask questions, wanting to know more about the woman whose place she had inadvertently taken in some ways. And her genuine interest made it possible for Jacob to keep Rachel's memory alive without it feeling like a burden or a source of pain. Sarah thrived under Catherine's care, growing from a screaming newborn into a more settled infant who was starting to smile and make cooing sounds. She still preferred being held to lying alone, still had her fussy moments, but the desperate, inconsolable crying that had characterized her first weeks of life had faded. She seemed to recognize Catherine's voice, would turn her head toward the sound of singing, and had developed a clear preference for being rocked in a particular way that Catherine had perfected. In September, Jacob took Catherine into town for supplies, Sarah tucked into a basket between them on the wagon seat. It was only the second time Catherine had been back to Sweetwater since arriving at the ranch, and she looked around with interest at the dusty streets and false-fronted buildings that made up the small town. They stopped at the general store, and Jacob helped Catherine down from the wagon, very aware of the way his hands fit around her waist, the momentary closeness before she stepped away to retrieve Sarah's basket. Inside the store, they ran into several people Jacob knew, and he introduced Catherine as Sarah's nursemaid, watching the knowing looks that passed between the townspeople with a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. He knew what they were thinking, knew what assumptions they were making, and he found he did not entirely mind. Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, was particularly effusive in her greeting, exclaiming over how well Sarah looked and how fortunate Jacob was to have found such excellent help. "We were all so worried about you, dear boy," she said, patting Jacob's arm with maternal concern. After Rachel passed, we thought you might not make it through, but look at you now. You have color in your face again, and Sarah looks absolutely perfect." She beamed at Catherine. "You must be a miracle worker, Miss Walsh." "The baby just needed consistency and patience," Catherine said modestly, "and a lot of singing. I am fortunate that she seems to like my voice." "Well, we are all grateful for what you have done," Mrs. Henderson said. "Poor Jacob was at his wits' end." We all were terribly concerned. After Mrs. Henderson moved on, Jacob and Catherine finished their shopping, loading supplies into the wagon. Jacob bought fabric for diapers and a new rattle for Sarah, and then, on impulse, he added a length of blue calico that matched Catherine's eyes. "For a new dress," he said when she looked at him questioningly. "If you would like. You have been working so hard and you deserve something nice." Catherine's eyes went bright, and for a moment Jacob thought she might cry. "That is very kind," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you, Jacob, truly." On the ride back to the ranch, Catherine was quieter than usual, and Jacob found himself stealing glances at her, wondering what she was thinking. Finally, as they turned onto the road that led to the house, she spoke. "People in town think we are courting," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Or that we will be soon. I could see it in the way they looked at us." Jacob's hands tightened on the reins. "Does that bother you?" "No," Catherine said, and there was certainty in her voice. "It does not bother me. I just wanted to know if it bothered you. If it makes you uncomfortable, having people assume things." "It does not bother me either," Jacob admitted. "I have been thinking," he paused, trying to find the right words. "Rachel has been gone 4 months now. I will always love her. She was my first love, and she gave me Sarah, and I will never forget her. But she is gone, and I am still here, and so are you. And I find that I care for you, Catherine, more than just as Sarah's nursemaid, more than just as someone who helped me when I was at my lowest." Catherine turned to look at him fully, her expression open and hopeful. "I care for you too," she said. "I have for a while now. I tried not to at first. I knew it was too soon, that you were still grieving, that it might seem inappropriate, but I could not help it. You are a good man, Jacob Thornton, and a wonderful father, and I feel more at home with you and Sarah than I have felt anywhere in a very long time." Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop there in the middle of the road, the house still visible in the distance but far enough away that they had privacy. He set the brake and turned to Catherine, reaching out to take her hand. Her fingers curled around his, warm and real, and he marveled at how right it felt, how natural. "I would like to court you properly," he said, his heart pounding in his chest, "if you would allow it. I know the timing is not conventional and people might talk, but I do not care about that. I care about you and about building a life with you, if that is something you want." "It is," Catherine said, and her smile was radiant. "It is absolutely something I want." Jacob leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and when she did not, he kissed her gently, his lips barely brushing hers. It was chaste and sweet, nothing like the passionate kisses he had shared with Rachel, but it was right for this moment, for this new beginning. When he pulled back, Catherine was blushing, her eyes bright with happiness. "We should probably get home," she said, laughing a little, "before people really do have something to talk about, finding us stopped in the middle of the road." Jacob laughed too, feeling lighter than he had in months, and urged the horses forward. That evening, after Sarah was fed and asleep in her crib, he and Catherine sat on the porch together, her hand in his, talking about what the future might look like. They agreed to take things slowly, to let their relationship develop naturally, but there was an understanding between them now, an acknowledgement of what was growing. As autumn progressed, Jacob and Catherine's relationship deepened. He taught her to ride better, taking her out on the gentler horses and showing her the boundaries of his land. She showed him how to bake bread properly, laughing at his first clumsy attempts and praising him when he finally managed a decent loaf. They worked together on the ranch, Catherine proving herself capable of far more than just childcare, helping with everything from mending tack to assisting with the garden harvest. Sarah continued to grow and thrive. By the time she was 6 months old, she was sitting up on her own, her dark hair growing in thick and her eyes a blue that reminded Jacob of Rachel. Catherine never tried to replace Sarah's mother, but she loved the baby with a fierce devotion that was clear to everyone who saw them together. She sang to Sarah constantly, had started teaching her simple games, and spent hours just playing with her, delighting in every small milestone. In November, Jacob took Catherine to the cemetery where Rachel was buried, a small plot near the church with a simple headstone that bore her name and dates. It was the first time Catherine had been there, and she stood quietly while Jacob laid flowers on the grave, her hand resting lightly on his arm in silent support. "I want you to know that I loved her," Jacob said, speaking to the headstone but knowing the words were for Catherine too. "I will always love her, but I am still alive and I have to keep living. I think she would understand that. I think she would be grateful that you are taking care of Sarah and me. I think she would have liked you." Catherine squeezed his arm gently. "I hope so," she said softly. "I wish I could have known her. She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was," Jacob agreed. "But so are you, Catherine. I am grateful every day that you answered that advertisement, that you came to us when we needed you most. You saved us in more ways than one." They stood there together in the November wind, paying respects to the past while acknowledging the future. And when they left, Jacob felt like he had been given permission, by Rachel or by God or by his own heart, to move forward without guilt. In December, with Sarah approaching 8 months old and the winter settling in mild as Texas winters often were, Jacob asked Catherine to marry him. He did it simply, without grand gestures, on an evening when they were sitting together after dinner, Sarah already asleep for the night. He had bought a ring in town the previous week, a simple gold band with a small garnet, nothing as elaborate as the ring he had given Rachel but beautiful in its own right. "Catherine Walsh," he said, taking her hand and holding the ring where she could see it, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you be Sarah's mother and my partner for all the years we have ahead of us?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Jacob, I will marry you. I cannot think of anything I want more." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the garnet gleaming in the lamplight. Then he kissed her, less chaste this time, with more promise of the passion that would come later, and she kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms coming up around his neck. They set the wedding for early January, giving themselves time to make arrangements but not waiting unnecessarily long. Jacob wanted Catherine to be his wife properly, wanted to start their life together as a real family. The ceremony was held at the church in Sweetwater, with Miguel and Rosa as witnesses and Sarah in attendance, held by Rosa during the brief service. Catherine wore a new dress made from the fabric Jacob had bought her, the blue calico fashioned into a simple but lovely gown that made her eyes shine. Jacob wore his best suit, the one he had worn to marry Rachel, and if he felt a pang of complicated emotion about that, it was tempered by the knowledge that he was moving forward, not trying to recreate what he had lost. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Catherine with his whole heart, and the small congregation applauded. Sarah made a gurgling sound of approval from Rosa's arms, and everyone laughed, the joy of the moment uncomplicated and real. The wedding dinner was held at Miguel and Rosa's house again, with neighbors and friends coming to celebrate. There was roasted beef and fresh bread, vegetables from the successful garden that Catherine and Jacob had planted, and a cake that Rosa had baked special. People danced to fiddle music, and Catherine sang at their request, her voice as sweet and true as ever, and Jacob felt his heart so full he thought it might burst. That night, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, Sarah sleeping peacefully in her basket. Jacob carried Catherine over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs together, and she laughed, her arms around his neck, her eyes bright with happiness. They put Sarah to bed together, standing over the crib for a moment to watch her sleep, and then Jacob led Catherine to their bedroom, nervous and excited in equal measure. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a true joining that felt like both a beginning and a homecoming. Catherine was shy at first, admitting that her previous engagement had never progressed to intimacy. But Jacob was patient, and they learned each other with care and growing confidence. When they finally came together, it was with mutual joy and pleasure, and afterward, Catherine lay in Jacob's arms, her head on his chest, perfectly content. "I love you," Jacob said into the darkness, the words coming easily now. "I love you, Catherine Thornton." "I love you too," Catherine replied, her hand resting over his heart. "I have loved you for a long time, I think. Maybe from that first day when you were so exhausted and desperate and I knew I could help. I think I started falling in love with you right then." They talked long into the night, making plans for the future, dreaming about what their life together might look like. They talked about expanding the ranch, about the garden they would plant in the spring, about Sarah's future and the possibility of more children. It was all ahead of them, spread out like a gift, and for the first time since Rachel died, Jacob felt genuinely excited about what was to come rather than just surviving each day as it arrived. The winter passed peacefully. Jacob and Catherine settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. There were adjustments, of course, small moments of negotiation as they learned to live as partners, but the foundation of friendship and respect they had built over the previous months made everything smoother. Catherine proved to be an excellent ranch wife, managing the household with the same competence she brought to everything else, and Jacob found himself falling more in love with her with each passing day. Sarah continued to thrive, now crawling and getting into everything, her personality emerging more clearly. She was strong-willed and curious, traits that reminded Jacob of Rachel but also clearly her own. Catherine was endlessly patient with her, redirecting her when she tried to grab dangerous things, laughing at her antics, praising her accomplishments. Sarah clearly adored Catherine, would light up when she entered a room, and had started trying to imitate the songs Catherine sang. In the spring, Catherine told Jacob she was pregnant. They had been married only 3 months, but the news filled Jacob with a complicated mix of emotions: joy at the prospect of another child, anxiety about the risks of childbirth after losing Rachel, excitement about expanding their family. Catherine seemed to sense his worry and took his hands in hers when she told him. "I am not Rachel," she said gently but firmly. "I am healthy and strong, and Doc Peterson says everything looks good. I know you are scared, Jacob, but you cannot let fear of what happened before stop you from being happy about this. We are going to have a baby, and it is going to be wonderful." Jacob pulled her close, holding her tight, feeling the slightly different shape of her body already, the small changes that pregnancy brought. "You are right," he said. "I am scared, terrified actually, but I am also happy. So happy, Catherine, you have given me so much already, and now this. I feel like the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Catherine had some morning sickness in the early months, but nothing severe, and she remained active on the ranch, insisting on continuing most of her usual work, until Jacob finally put his foot down and demanded she take it easier. Sarah seemed to sense something was different about her mother, would pat Catherine's growing belly with gentle hands, and Catherine would sing to both children, the one in her arms and the one still inside her. As summer arrived, hot and dry, Catherine grew larger and moved with increasing difficulty, but her spirits remained high. She and Jacob worked together on preparing a nursery in the room that had been Catherine's when she first arrived, the small space that had always been meant for a baby. They moved Sarah to a larger room of her own, and the little girl adapted well, proud of her new big girl bed. In August, when Catherine was 8 months along, she went into labor on a day when Jacob had ridden out to check on the southern fence line. Rosa, who had been visiting, sent one of her sons racing after him while she stayed with Catherine, helping her through the early contractions with the calm assurance of experience. Jacob rode back to the ranch at a full gallop, his heart in his throat, memories of Rachel's labor threatening to overwhelm him. But when he burst into the house, wild-eyed and terrified, he found Catherine in their bedroom, upright and walking through contractions, Rosa supporting her, looking uncomfortable but determined and very much alive. "It is all right," Catherine told him when she saw his face. "I am all right, Jacob. This is normal. The baby is just coming a bit early, that is all." Doc Peterson arrived an hour later, examined Catherine, and confirmed that everything was progressing normally. "The baby is smaller, coming early like this," he said, "but I do not hear any distress. Mrs. Thornton is strong and healthy. I think we are going to have a fine outcome here." Jacob stayed with Catherine through the labor, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, supporting her when she needed to walk and standing strong when she squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt during contractions. She was brave and determined, never crying out even when he could see the pain was intense, and he marveled at her strength. When their son was born as the sun was setting, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival with authority, Jacob wept with relief and joy. The baby was small but perfect, with a full head of dark hair and a red, angry face that quickly settled into more peaceful expressions as Doc Peterson cleaned him and wrapped him in blankets. "You have a son," Catherine said, exhausted but smiling as the doctor placed the baby in her arms. "A beautiful, healthy son." Jacob sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at his new child with wonder. "What should we call him?" he asked. "I thought perhaps Michael," Catherine said, "after your father, and James for my father. Michael James Thornton." "It is perfect," Jacob said, his voice rough with emotion. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for this gift, for being so strong, for being all right." Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder, both of them looking at their son, and in that moment, Jacob felt his family was complete. Sarah, who had been staying with Rosa, was brought home the next day to meet her new brother. At just over a year old, she was fascinated by the baby, wanting to touch him gently and make him smile. Catherine showed her how to be careful, and Sarah took her role as big sister seriously, always wanting to help when Michael cried. The next few years passed in a blur of happy chaos. The ranch continued to prosper under Jacob's management, and Catherine proved invaluable as a partner in all aspects of the business. She kept the books, managed the household accounts, dealt with merchants and buyers when necessary, all while raising 2 young children with patience and grace. Sarah grew into a bright, energetic little girl who loved to follow her father around the ranch, begging to help with whatever he was doing. Michael was a quieter child, more contemplative, but sweet-natured and easy to please. In 1881, when Sarah was 3 and Michael was almost 2, Catherine gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, whose arrival sent the household into delightful upheaval. The babies were identical, with Catherine's auburn hair and Jacob's blue eyes, and telling them apart was nearly impossible for anyone except their parents. Sarah was thrilled to have sisters, took her role as oldest very seriously, and helped Catherine with the babies whenever she could. Michael was less certain about the twins at first, put out by losing some of his mother's attention, but he quickly adapted and became protective of them. The house, which had once felt empty and haunted by Rachel's death, was now full of life and laughter, and the controlled chaos of a growing family. Jacob had built an addition, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and Catherine had made it beautiful with curtains and quilts, and all the small touches that turned a house into a home. One evening in the fall of 1882, after all 4 children were finally asleep, a nightly accomplishment that felt like a miracle, Jacob and Catherine sat on the porch together, watching the stars come out. Catherine was pregnant again, just beginning to show, and she rested one hand on her belly with absent affection. "Sometimes I think about that day you arrived," Jacob said, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. "How desperate I was, how certain I was that I was not going to survive. And then there you were, walking up that road with your carpetbag, looking so calm and capable, and everything changed." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted. "I had no idea if I would be able to help, if Sarah would accept me, if you would even let me try. But I knew I had to. Something told me I was meant to be there, that this was where I was supposed to be." "You saved us," Jacob said simply. "Sarah and me both. You sang her to sleep that first night, and it was like magic. I had not slept since she was born, and within hours of your arrival, I was resting for the first time in weeks. You were the answer to a prayer I did not even know how to pray." "We saved each other," Catherine corrected gently. "You gave me a home when I needed one, a family when I thought I might never have one. You let me love you and Sarah, and then you gave me Michael and the twins, and now this little one." She patted her belly. "I have never been happier than I am right here, right now with you." Jacob kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. His life had not turned out the way he expected. He had loved and lost, had come to the brink of collapse, had found love again in the most unexpected way. But sitting here with Catherine, their children sleeping inside the home they had built together, he could not imagine wanting anything different. "I love you," he said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them. "I will love you for all the rest of my days, Catherine Thornton." "And I love you," Catherine replied, turning her face up to kiss him properly. "Always and forever." Inside the house, one of the twins started to fuss, and Catherine sighed, starting to rise, but Jacob stopped her. "Let me," he said. "You rest. I will check on them." He went inside, moving quietly through the house to the room where Emma and Grace slept. Grace was the one fussing, and he picked her up gently, holding her against his shoulder. She settled immediately, making small, contented sounds, and Jacob rocked her slowly, humming one of the songs Catherine had taught him years ago. Looking down at his daughter's peaceful face, Jacob thought about all the songs Catherine had sung over the years. Songs for Sarah when she was a screaming newborn. Songs for Michael when he was colicky as a baby. Songs for the twins to help tell them apart by which melodies they preferred. Music had been the foundation of their family, the thing that had first brought peace to his household and continued to bring joy. He thought about Rachel too, as he often did, but the memories no longer hurt the way they once had. He remembered her with love and gratitude for the time they had together, for giving him Sarah, for being part of his journey even though her time was cut short. He liked to think she would be proud of the life he had built, the family he had created with Catherine, the way he had honored her memory while still moving forward. Grace had fallen back asleep in his arms, and Jacob carefully placed her back in her crib before checking on Emma, who was sleeping peacefully. He looked in on Michael next, finding his son sprawled across his bed with complete abandon, and then Sarah, who slept curled up with the rag doll Catherine had made her. All four of his children, safe and healthy and loved beyond measure. When he returned to the porch, Catherine had brought out 2 cups of coffee, and they sat together in comfortable silence, drinking the hot brew and watching the night. The ranch was quiet except for the usual sounds: cattle lowing in the distance, the wind moving through the grass, an owl calling somewhere nearby. "I want to tell you something," Catherine said after a while. "Something I have been thinking about lately, with the new baby coming." Jacob looked at her, seeing by moonlight the face he loved, older now than when she had first arrived but no less beautiful to him. "What is it?" "I want to make sure Sarah knows about Rachel," Catherine said carefully. "I know we talk about her sometimes, but as Sarah gets older, I want her to really know her mother. I want her to know that Rachel loved her, that she made those blankets in her crib, that she wanted her so much. I never want Sarah to feel like I am trying to replace Rachel or erase her." Jacob's throat tightened with emotion. This was one of the many reasons he loved Catherine: her generous heart, her ability to honor the past while building the future. "You are a remarkable woman," he said. "And yes, we will make sure Sarah knows about Rachel. All the children will know about her. She is part of our family's story, part of where we came from." "Good," Catherine said, leaning against him again. "That is important to me, and I hope wherever Rachel is, she knows that I have tried to love her daughter as my own, that I have tried to take care of the family she left behind." "She knows," Jacob said with certainty. "If there is any justice in the world, she knows, and she is grateful." The years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The 5th child, another boy they named Daniel, was born healthy and strong in the spring of 1883. The ranch expanded, Jacob buying additional land and increasing their herd. Sarah started school in town, riding in with Jacob when he went to conduct business. Michael followed a few years later, and then the twins, until all the children were spending their days learning to read and write and cipher. Catherine became known throughout the county not just as Jacob Thornton's wife, but as a woman of substance in her own right. She served on the church committee, organized social events, and became the person people sought out when they needed help or advice. Her gift for music was well known, and she taught singing to many of the local children, including her own. Sarah grew up knowing she had 2 mothers: one who had given her life and died bringing her into the world, and one who had raised her and loved her and taught her to sing. Catherine made sure Rachel's memory was honored, telling Sarah stories about her birth mother, making sure she knew how much Rachel had wanted her. On Sarah's 10th birthday, Catherine gave her Rachel's wedding ring, a small gold band that Rachel had asked Jacob to save for their daughter. "Your mother wanted you to have this," Catherine said as Sarah looked at the ring with wide eyes. "She loved you very much, even though she never got to know you, and I hope you know that I love you just as much. You are my daughter in every way that matters." Sarah rose. Sarah, who had Catherine's confidence and Jacob's determination, threw her arms around Catherine and hugged her tightly. "You are my mother," she said fiercely. "You have always been my mother. I know about Rachel, and I am glad to have her ring, but you are the one who raised me. You are the one I love." Catherine held her daughter close, tears streaming down her face, feeling blessed beyond measure. This was her family, these children she had raised, this man she had married, this life they had built together. It had not started the way any of them expected, born out of tragedy and desperation, but it had become something beautiful, As the children grew older, each developed their own personality and path. Sarah proved to have a head for numbers and business, often helping Jacob with the ranch accounts. Michael had his father's way with horses and spent most of his time in the stables. Emma was the artist of the family, always drawing or painting, while Grace had inherited Catherine's musical ability and could play any instrument she picked up. Daniel, the youngest, was still finding his way but showed signs of wanting to follow in his father's footsteps as a rancher. In the summer of 1890, when Sarah was 12 and preparing to leave for school back east, the whole family gathered for a photograph. The photographer had come out from town with his equipment, and they all stood in front of the house, Jacob and Catherine in the center, surrounded by their 5 children, ranging from Sarah nearly grown to Daniel just 7 years old. The photographer's flash powder flared, capturing the moment forever, preserving this snapshot of the Thornton family in all their happy chaos. That night, after the photographer had left and the children were in bed, Jacob and Catherine sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years. They were both in their late 30s now, no longer young but not yet old, comfortable in their bodies and their lives in a way that came from years of partnership. "You remember the first night I was here?" Catherine asked, her hand in Jacob's as always. "When you finally fell asleep in that chair, and I held Sarah and sang to her." "I remember," Jacob said. "I remember thinking when I woke up that I had dreamed you, that you could not possibly be real. No one could have done what you did, settling Sarah like that, making everything seem possible again." "I was so nervous," Catherine admitted. "I had no idea if I could really help, or if I was going to fail and have to leave. But then Sarah fell asleep in my arms and I looked at you sleeping in that chair, and I thought maybe this is where I am meant to be. Maybe this is home." "It was home," Jacob said. "From that moment on it was home. You made it home, Catherine. You took a house full of grief and despair, and turned it into a home full of love and laughter. You saved me and Sarah, and then you gave us so much more, Michael and the twins and Daniel, and this whole beautiful life. I could not have imagined any of this that day, when I was so exhausted I could barely think. But you made it all possible." Catherine squeezed his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds. Inside the house, their children slept safely, growing and thriving under their care. The ranch was prosperous, their reputation solid, their community strong. It was everything they could have hoped for, built from the ashes of tragedy into something enduring and good. Years later, when Jacob was an old man and his children had children of their own, he would tell the story of how Catherine had come into his life. He would tell about the terrible weeks after Sarah was born when he could not sleep, about the grief and exhaustion that had nearly killed him. And then he would tell about the woman who walked up the road on a blistering summer day, carrying a carpet bag and a gift for music that would change everything. "She sang your grandmother to sleep that first night," he would tell his grandchildren, bouncing them on his knee. "Your grandmother Sarah had cried for 3 solid weeks, and nothing would settle her. But then your grandma Catherine arrived and she held Sarah and sang to her, and for the first time since she was born, your grandmother Sarah fell asleep peacefully. And I slept too, for the first time in weeks. It was like magic, the way her voice could bring peace to our home." The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, and Catherine, silver-haired but still beautiful, would smile and shake her head. "It was not magic," she would say. "It was just love, love and the right song at the right time." But Jacob knew better. It had been magic, the kind of magic that happens when the right person arrives at exactly the moment they are needed most. It had been fate or providence or sheer luck that had brought Catherine Walsh to his ranch that day. But whatever the reason, Jacob was grateful for it every single day of his life. As he grew older and his time grew shorter, Jacob never regretted the path his life had taken. He missed Rachel still, in quiet moments, but that loss had been transformed by time, and Catherine's love into something that added richness to his life rather than diminishing it. He had been blessed with two great loves: Rachel, who had given him Sarah and taught him what it meant to be a husband, and Catherine, who had saved him and given him the family and life he had built. When Jacob finally died at the age of 72, it was peacefully in his sleep, Catherine beside him as she had been for over 40 years. His 5 children, all grown and successful in their own ways, gathered for the funeral, and his grandchildren, 14 of them, by then mourned the grandfather who had been a constant source of love and wisdom in their lives. At the funeral, Sarah stood to speak about her father, and she told the story that everyone knew but never tired of hearing. "My father loved twice in his life," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "He loved my birth mother, Rachel, who died bringing me into the world. And he loved Catherine, who came to us when we needed her most and became the mother I knew and loved. My father always said that Catherine sang me to sleep that first night, and in doing so, she gave him the gift of rest and hope. She brought peace to our home when there was only grief and exhaustion. And from that first night, our family began to heal and grow into what it became." Catherine, elderly now but still with that same calm strength that had defined her from the beginning, sat in the front row with her children around her, and she wept for the man she had loved for most of her life. She thought about that first day, walking up the dusty road to the Thornton ranch with nothing but a carpet bag and hope. She thought about the exhausted man she had found on the porch, holding a crying baby, looking like he was at the end of his rope. She thought about all the years that had followed, the life they had built, the love they had shared, and she was grateful. Grateful for every moment, every song, every child, every sunrise on the ranch, every evening sitting on the porch with Jacob's hand in hers. It had been a good life, a blessed life, better than anything she could have imagined when she left Missouri with a broken heart and an uncertain future. Catherine lived for another 8 years after Jacob's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still singing the old songs that had brought so much comfort over the years. When she finally passed away peacefully at the age of 80, the whole county mourned. She was buried next to Jacob, and on her other side was Rachel's grave, the 3 of them together in death as they had been connected in life. Sarah, now a grandmother herself, stood at her mother's grave and sang the Irish song that Catherine had sung that first night, the song about rivers and journeys and finding your way home. Her voice was older but still true, carrying the melody that had been passed down through the family. And as she sang, she thought about the woman who had raised her, who had loved her, who had shown her what it meant to be strong and kind and generous. The Thornton ranch continued through the generations, passed down through Sarah to her children and their children. The story of how Jacob and Catherine met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. The house that Jacob had built and Catherine had made a home was preserved and maintained, and great-great-grandchildren would run through the same rooms where Sarah and Michael and the twins and Daniel had played. And on summer evenings, when the family gathered on the old porch, someone would always sing one of Catherine's songs, the melodies that had bound the family together from the very beginning. The songs that had brought peace to a grieving man and a crying baby, that had heralded the beginning of a love story born from tragedy and transformed into triumph. In the end, that was the legacy Catherine and Jacob left, not just the ranch or the family name, but the understanding that love can come when you least expect it, that healing is possible even after devastating loss, and that sometimes the right person arriving at the right moment can change everything. Catherine had walked up a dusty Texas road in the summer of 1878 looking for work, and she had found a calling, a family, and a love that would echo through generations. The cowboy had not slept since his daughter was born, but then she arrived and sang the baby to sleep, and in doing so, she woke him up to the possibility of living and loving again. It was a story of salvation and second chances, of music and medicine, of a love that grew from desperate need into something profound and lasting. And it was a story that the Thornton family would tell for generations to come, making sure that Catherine's songs and her legacy of love would never be forgotten.